right now. In a new report published, perhaps a more positive one than some other reports currently doing the rounds, there seems to be a growing acceptance of trans people among the younger generation. Just Like Us, the LGBT plus young people's charity, conducted this recent research, and it shows that 84% of people would support a friend who came out as transgender. Perhaps we are taking bigger steps towards a more tolerant, accepting society. The CEO of Just Like Us joins me now. Dominic Arnell, welcome to Radio London. Hello, how are you?
Very well, thanks.
And I'm also joined by Joanne Monk from Sussex, who's joining us. Joanne, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi, Selma. Thank you.
Hello, lovely to have you both here. Dominic, before we even start, tell us a little bit about this latest report that's been conducted from Just Like Us.
Well, we were quite concerned over the last year, what with it being locked down and everything, that LGBT plus young people weren't getting access to their normal support networks. So LGBT plus people typically will rely on support networks that sit outside of the house. And one of the things that we were particularly interested in is the impact on trans young people, because trans people, and particularly trans young people, are a very marginalised group and tend to have mental health outcomes that can be very challenging, essentially. So we did a whole lot of research, and we surveyed almost 3,000 people, over 1,000 of which were LGBT. And as you say, it's just really nice to be able to tell a really positive story about trans inclusion at a time when a lot of the reports that come out about people feel pretty negative.
I was going to say, there's so much that we see in the headlines about the violence that is conducted against trans women, both in the States and here in the UK. So it did, even when I was reading that, it felt refreshing to have something that changed that. Dominic, do you think we are going in the right direction? Are we taking more positive steps?
I think we are, and we've got an awfully long way to go. The research also showed that trans people were much more likely to say that their mental health had got worse than cisgender people during lockdown. So it's good news as well as bad news. But I think what this really shows is that throughout the passing of time, I think lots of people of my age will be kind of a little bit ashamed of our great grandparents' views and that sort of thing. And will hold different views. And what this really shows is that, trans people aren't new. Trans people have been around forever. And the important thing really is just to accept people. And when people tell you who they are, believe them.
If that's not an age-old proverb, I don't know what one is. When people tell you who they are, absolutely believe them. And Joanne Monk, you were part of this study and this report.
Yeah, I've been involved with it and been involved with a lot of other things as well. And you may or may not be aware, I received an OBE in the Queen's New Year's Honours List this year for services to transgender equality.
And from your perception and the work that you've done, Joanne, in this space, do you agree with Dominic? Do you think we are making progress? Do you think we're taking leaps in the right direction?
We are moving in the right direction. I wouldn't necessarily say they're leaps. There's been a lot of controversy about LGBT education in schools, which is obviously important because the students of today are our future. And this is what Transgender Day of Visibility is all about. It's about celebrating the achievements and resilience of the transgender community, but we also have to remember what the transgender community goes through, whatever age, and that can be mental health, it can be hate, it can be bullying in schools, hate for older transgender people, hate crimes, violence, and there's a long way to go.
Joanne, from your experiences, what do you think is the biggest next step that we need to do as a society to start changing, whether it's the education, the attitudes, the workplace? What's next? Where do we go from here?
Well, there's a lot to do on initially education, and education has to start in schools because it helps to eliminate unconscious bias, and microaggressions that can develop as the students mature, as the children mature. In the workplace, we need allies. Most importantly, we need allies, and those allies can be biological male, biologically female, who support and understand the issues that the transgender community help, and by them supporting, create a more inclusive workplace.
Absolutely. And Dominic, I want to shoot over to you for a second and ask you this question. How do we get more awareness for the trans community, but in a way that is safe?
I think you're right to focus on safety. I think often so many of the stories in the press will say, oh, look at this, we're now calling gingerbread men gingerbread people and all these sorts of things. Whereas the trans people I know are really principally concerned with getting through the day safely, and I'm afraid it really is as simple as that. I'd also agree with Joanne that I think education is the best place to start. Just like us run an event called School Diversity Week once a year at the end of June, and it's completely free to get in, to take part in. We've got lots and lots of resources to support trans education. So come over to our website, www.justlikeus.org, to check that out.
Dominic, I think I agree when it comes to changing perceptions or creating tolerance in our society. So much of hatred and bigotry comes from ignorance, and there is a huge part that education does have to play, and that's why we need to be in schools earlier, whether we're fighting people who are, whether we're fighting racism or sexism or whatever it might be. We need to get in there early, like you've both said that. But Dominic, what do we do for the people who've left school? What do we do for the grown-ups, for the adults, the people who are in positions of power in the workplace, our bosses? How do we begin to shift those attitudes?
Well, I think, as Joanne mentioned, I think the workplace is a really, really important place to start with that. So you've got, for example, a number of initiatives that take place in the workplace. But I'd say to anyone, if someone comes out to you as transgender, if someone tells you they're transgender, really you don't need to be an expert in this stuff. You need to listen. You need to ask what you can do to be supportive. And then you need to listen to what the person says and put that in place. So it really is that easy most of the time. People are very, very good, particularly trans people, are really pretty good at telling you what it is that they need in order to make their lives easier, because they're used to doing it, of course. So I'd say just listen to people.
There is a fear, though, isn't there, Joanne? And I don't know if you've ever experienced this, where you talk to people about these issues and they don't know what to say because they're afraid that they're going to say the wrong thing.
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head there, and this is half the problem, is fear. And this is why the transgender community do get a lot of problems, a lot of mental health issues, anything associated with that coming out in the workplace, because fear is born of just not understanding. It's something that people perceive to be outside of, put it in inverted commas, the norm. But you know what? The transgender community have a lot to offer, an awful lot to offer. We're all human beings. We all deserve to be treated with dignity and respect, just regardless of who we are or what we are. And that can relate to so many other things as well, of the diverse communities. But, as Dominic said, it is important in the workplace, and there's so many things that organisations can put in place to support transgender employees. And let's face it, a lot of them are actually afraid to come out at work because there's a fear that they may lose respect from their colleagues, they may lose their jobs. And if an organisation accepts that these people have things to offer, just as anybody else, support them, provide some sort of network where there's somebody that they can talk to, a direct link that they can talk to, have, for example, diversity champions, who would be people that somebody that's thinking of coming out at work can talk to. They can be signposted to support organisations, to charities that will help them. And it makes the whole process easy. But there's a lot of other things that workplaces, organisations can put in place as well. Gender-neutral toilet facilities, and that's the classic one, and that's been a massive debate for years for the transgender community. And invasion, of course, when you're talking about male to female, there's been a lot of debate on invasion of women's places.
Joanne, forgive me, but I'm going to take this down a level, and I'm going to be really rudimentary here, because there's going to be people listening in right now who don't have any friends who are transgender, who don't know anyone who's transgender, who's never even spoken to someone who's transgender, who doesn't understand what it all means, and they don't know, well, and this is a real common thing that people will say, well, I don't know, how do I refer to that person? Are they a he that was a she, or a she that was a he? And what do I say? And I always, say, I'm like, well, that doesn't matter. Why does that matter, right? But that's the reality of where a lot of people are at. And they're afraid of getting it wrong. They're afraid of calling that person by the wrong pronoun, or not, or when they're opposite them being unsure what it is. They don't know how to broach this subject, to even ask the questions that they want to ask, because they're so afraid of offending, or they think they'll get it wrong. Joanne, what's your advice to those people listening in?
Just ask.
We're afraid to ask. People are afraid to ask, aren't they?
Well, but I mean, there's I suppose there's sort of various grades of transgender people, should say. I have always been really, really open and positive about my journey. I started my transition back in 2014, and I've always been really positive about it. I've talked to people. I've explained, this is me. I'm still the same person. I'm just going to look different. And it's about getting this understanding across to somebody that perhaps isn't sure. They don't know what to say. And for a lot of people, that is really hard, and particularly to the older generation.
Yeah.
And this then reflects back on educating young people that it's okay to be who you want to be.
Yeah, and I think you make a really pertinent point there about the older generation, who aren't necessarily used to having the conversations that the younger generation are, or even the tools and the language to have those conversations. Dominic, I wanted to go to you. What do you hope will be the result of this report? Obviously, you said at the beginning that it's great that these findings are more positive. What would you like this report to do?
So we'd like schools across the country to really take their first steps. So we know that there are schools that are great at trans inclusion and that really get it right. But there are a lot more schools that haven't really approached this yet. And what we want to say is, look, you might not know about this yet. You might find this a little bit difficult, a bit complicated with parents, but come to us and talk to us, and we're going to help you on this journey, because it's really, really important that we get this right, both to make sure that young people are prepared for life in modern Britain, where trans people exist, but also for our trans young people who, as we've shown in the report, are already very marginalised, and it's important to make sure that they're included in our community.
Absolutely, and I think that's the pertinent thing, isn't it? Letting everyone know in the community that they are, valued, they are part of this. Dominic, where can people find more information if they want to?
So if they want to go over to our website at www.justlikeus.com. Oh, sorry, .org.
.org, justlikeus.org. Dominic Arnell, thank you so much for joining us. And Joanne Monk, thank you so much for chatting and sharing your story. It's been lovely chatting to you both.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take.
Thank you.
Take.
Thank you.
Take.
Thank you.